From an exclusive look at the most underrated stages of the Golden Boy's career to his graduation 13 years after dropping out of college, these are all the details about Steph Curry's new documentary. It's going to be one of the best NBA documentaries ever made. Although it's nothing like any doc we've seen before, because instead of a gripping analysis of his first 12 seasons, it only focuses on two parts of his life, where Curry was the most underestimated baller. The title alone is enough to hook the man's haters too, because love him or not, it's no secret that Curry started off as one of the most unappreciated players in history, and the documentary's title, Underrated, says it all. Though the 34-year-old has been overlooked for most of his life, this doc covers the two main points where no one thought highly of him, from his first ever game in the NCCA that put him on the map, to the 2021 to 2022 Warriors season, where once again, critics claimed that the chef's magic had run its course. But in both these cases, Curry proved all his doubters wrong, and the doc covers his motivation beautifully, only because the Golden Boy actively contributed to the project. Still, I can't give all the credit to the star player because, with a director as talented as Peter Nix, and with Apple on board to make it one of their original films, it might just beat LeBron and MJ's documentaries. Some lucky people have already seen this work of art when it premiered at the 2023 Sundance Film Festival in January. But for us not-so-famous fans, the film's gonna hit the theaters on July 21st. But trust me, it's gonna be worth the wait because Emmy-winning director Peter Nix's name is a true mark of quality on the doc, especially with his last film Homeroom turning out as a huge success. Not just that, Curry's own production company, Unanimous Media, along with A24, one of America's biggest production companies, have worked together on the film. Apple was the last missing piece that Nix needed to make sure that Curry's life story is heard by billions of people. And honestly, it needs to reach every basketball fan alive because despite Steph's current spotlight in the NBA, he was never the first choice for any scouts back in his college days, and the pre-title sequence actually reveals details of his scouting report. While no NBA star player could ever have a bad scouting report, because, well, they were all giants who ran like the Flash and looked like the Hulk, Chef Curry was neither of those things. The only weapon he had was his shooting game, and we all know that the three-pointer god never misses. But apparently, for some college coaches, that just wasn't enough, because Steph's scouting report was filled with only his flaws, saying that the 9-time All-Star shoots too much. Obviously, the coaches were blind because they didn't mention that all of those shots land through the net. Not just that, the report focused a lot more on his build and shape, saying that he wasn't big enough to score inside, and he was so skinny that there was no way he'd be able to put on some weight. The irony of this, though, is that his report is read out loud while showing a clip of the Golden Boy breaking the record for the most three-pointers in NBA history. I bet all those coaches are regretting their decisions now, and let me tell you, there were a lot of them. Because the doc focuses on Curry's development from a tiny player that was rejected by almost every single Division I school. In fact, they go way back to Steph's early years, showing clips of a tiny Curry dribbling a huge basketball. Even later on in college when he was rejected by many Division I schools only because of his short height and weak build. He was still lucky enough to barely make it into Davidson College. Still, his clips from that time show him in baggy shorts, which was the uniform back then. But there was less of Steph and more of his clothes because it looked like the uniform was swallowing him. But that was the last we saw of the mini Chef Curry because the doc moves on to his ultimate transformation as a pro. That's right, I know it's hard to believe that the Golden Boy used to be even smaller. And before you Curry fans start saying he's 6'2", I think we can all agree that he looks like a kid next to some NBA giants. Still, Steph has come a long way, as he's shown in the film, working heavy weights, never missing a day at the gym, and while he'll never be massive, his transformation is still stunning. Here's where the chef tells his own story, saying that he fell in love with the sport at age 9 and decided that he'd make it his career at any cost. But everyone who saw the kid knew he'd hardly last 5 minutes on the court except for his father, who realized that what Steph lacked in height and physical strength, he easily made up for that with his shooting skills. That's exactly why Del Curry was hell-bent on training his muscles, that it'd help him get his shot off in an instant. So even though he didn't magically grow taller, he spent a lot of time working on those shooting muscles. And they even show a scene from the present, where Steph is just as focused, speed dribbling a ball with one hand while playing a rapid game of catch with the other. But let me just say that it wasn't his training alone that made him the greatest shooter of all time. He had a lot of help along the way, and the doc gives most of the credit to his Davidson coach, Bob McKillop. I've got to say, props to McKillop for even giving Steph a chance, because in his college debut, the Golden Boy was not so golden. He made so many errors that he had to turn the ball over 13 times. And while Curry provides a reason for that, saying that he was overwhelmed, I think everyone can agree that it's not the first impression you'd want to leave. Still, despite his horrible debut, McKillop put him on the roster for their next game against Michigan, where Steph scored a whopping 32 points in all his glory. And that was the birth of a legend. Because after that game, Chef Curry went on a roll, leading Davidson to the Elite Eight in the NCCA for the first time since 1969. The Golden Boy kicked the first round of the Midwest tournament, leading the Davidson Wildcats by 40 points, which were also the fifth most in NCCA history. In the second round, Curry outplayed an entire team, humiliating Georgetown by scoring 25 points in only 15 minutes. But his semis performance was the first time that an NBA player noticed the tiny beast when he scored 33 against Wisconsin, while the king, LeBron James himself, watched from the crowd. Unfortunately, the Wildcats weren't so lucky in the finals, with Kansas coming out on top by a very close 2-point lead. But don't feel bad for the Golden Boy, because his days standing in the corner were gone. Not only was he chosen as the Midwest's most outstanding player, but his NCCA run put him on every major team's radar, and because of an offer from the Warriors that he couldn't reject, Steph had to drop out of college and go pro. And no one is blaming him. I mean, that was the best decision he ever made. But still, he was just one semester away from graduating. So I guess putting yourself on the map does come at a cost, and not a small one at all. Because Steph was the only player coached by McKillop that never made it to the graduation ceremony. And it couldn't have been harder for him, because despite his golden career, his mother's biggest wish was for him to graduate college. And he wasn't going to ignore one of his biggest supporters, so 13 years after dropping out, Steph finally graduated from Davidson. And the fact that Nix has focused so much on his graduation goes to show that he values a degree as much as Steph's NCCA run or even his NBA titles. The 33-year-old MVP is seen attending Zoom lectures and struggling to write his thesis, while his daughters are doing their homework right next to him. One of them even taunts Steph by saying, "You're in school too." And that could have made a perfect ending all by itself. But Nix took it a step further, highlighting the Golden Boys' final challenge, the 2021 to 2022 NBA season, when after failing to even make the playoffs for 2 consecutive seasons, Steph and the Warriors were once again in the eyes of critics, who all claimed that they were no longer at their peak now. But the Golden Boy proved all of them wrong by breezing through the playoffs, breaking all the three-pointer records in history, and finally winning the finals, and being crowned the 2022 Finals MVP for the first time. So, from his graduation 13 years after dropping out of college, to a look at the most underrated stages of the Golden Boy's career, those were all the details about Steph Curry's new documentary.